More news today. Violence has once again flared up.
These are the images the world has been seeing from the streets of Canada.
Giant corporations rule the day.
Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about Libya in the post-Gaddafi era. Okay, Lindsay, if I can go back to you in London. You mentioned NATO earlier on in the program, and NATO is gloating right now. It actually did something. It thinks it's actually done something successful after the quagmire of Afghanistan. Does this worry you that it gives itself a feather in the hat and say, look, we actually can do things that are efficient and we can work together? When, of course, the Americans were very critical of their dragging their feet. Most of the members of NATO didn't really want to participate in this.
Well, of course, NATO is a US-led operation. There's absolutely no question about this. You have to ask why the North Atlantic Treaty Organization intervenes in South Asia, North Africa and various other places which are nothing to do with the North Atlantic. This was set up after the Second World War in opposition to the Warsaw Pact countries. The Warsaw Pact was dissolved some years ago, but NATO is becoming more militaristic, is getting more and more money from particularly countries like the US and Britain in order to carry out its operations. And I think it's very worrying. They're all saying this is a great success, this rehabilitates the whole notion of humanitarian intervention. It does nothing of the sort. Many thousands of people have been killed in Libya, including many by NATO bombing. And also, we should remember, we heard exactly this before in 2001 and 2003, when, again, Afghanistan and Iraq were said to be success stories. Very few people now claim either of those was a success. You look at what has happened in these countries,
Could I jump in here,
and
Peter?
actually, ordinary people have got no better off.
Okay, Daniel, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'd have to take a couple of issues with what Lindsay said. There's no question that this campaign would not have been successful without the participation of the United States in terms of drone activity, intelligence activity, etc., cruise missiles that NATO didn't have and didn't contribute. I would also make a comparison in terms of what NATO accomplished in Kosovo in 78 days versus what NATO has accomplished in around 150 days in Libya. In Kosovo, there was an intervention force that followed. There so far has been no intervention force on the part of NATO. The question is, will there be? And, you know, ultimately there were far fewer casualties, NATO casualties. There were about 10 in this conflict versus about 500 in NATO. On the question of whether it achieved its aims, I would have to say it did ultimately achieve its aims, but it only achieved its aims as a result of the contribution of money to the rebels from a variety of sources in conjunction with what the military was able to achieve through NATO.
Okay. Okay, Lindsay, go right ahead. You want to reply to that? Go ahead. Lindsay, no, let Lindsay reply.
The operation was meant to be protecting civilians. It was not meant to be regime change. It was absolutely clear from the very beginning that that was actually what was happening. And to compare it with Kosovo, as though Kosovo again is some success story, is simply not the case. It's one of the poorest areas of Europe, with centres of prostitution, drug running, gun running. I mean, this is hardly the kind of state that we should be looking to as a model. And you actually, well, I'm sorry, and if you look at
Peter,
the person promoted by NATO and the West, then actually this is a man who's accused of selling body parts.
Okay, Eric, go ahead in Toronto.
You know, please, enough with the Serb propaganda from you, Lindsay. Kosovo, there was the risk. There were 800,000 Albanian civilians who were being driven out of their homes in the dead of winter. Many of them would have died from exposure. This is not about body parts or prostitution.
Agree with Tony Blair
they were very right.
Over this.
Let me finish. Let me finish. NATO did the right thing, the United States did the right thing by intervening in this real humanitarian crisis. Libya is something entirely different, and what we're seeing is a return of the old colonial powers in North Africa, France,
and that's exactly what was happening
Italy,
in
and Spain
the
to an
Balkans as
extent.
well.
And they are militating against each other already to see who gets control. The French are ahead. The Italians are very dismayed now that the French may be gobbling up all the golden eggs in Libya. So we can't compare the two things together.
Okay, Daniel, let's keep with the NATO theme
could I
here.
add one more thing on that?
Go right ahead, jump in, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I simply wanted to add that let's not, delude ourselves as to what this is and what it isn't. Sure, it started out with humanitarian objectives in Libya. There can be no doubt, given what's going on in the neighborhood, what it was going to end up being. And I don't think there are very many people who are going to cry about Gaddafi leaving the scene. And I should point out he hasn't yet left the scene. And there are still some important battles that must be won for the rebels to rightly claim that this game is over.
Lindsay, I mean, I want to stay with this NATO theme. You think that Syria is next? I mean, maybe does NATO feel emboldened now? I mean, if you look at Bahrain, I mean, there's so many other humanitarian issues in the region, but it's all based on geopolitical interest, okay? And I think certainly it's obvious, oil was at stake here in Libya. There's no denying that. We'll see where it goes. But, there's the crackdown in Syria then NATO should go in there, or maybe it should maybe it should liberate Bahrain from Saudi control. Okay, I mean, what I'm trying to look at is the double standard.
That isn't going to happen.
Well, of course
that
not.
won't happen in a hurry. I don't think they won't go in to do anything to criticise the Saudis or indeed Bahrain. The American fleet is in Bahrain. They could have intervened if they wanted to at any time. They had no interest in doing so. There are clearly now people who will say they should intervene in Syria. I think many of the NATO powers will still be very wary about this, but that can change very quickly. I think if we understand Libya, I don't agree it was about just simply revenge on the part of the Gulf states against Gaddafi, although they obviously didn't like him. But I think it was much more that if you look at the timing of Libya, it coincided with the crackdown by the Saudis and the Bahraini royal family in Bahrain, and it was an attempt by the Western powers to regain control after the Tunisians and the Egyptians had overthrown their dictators. And they will do everything that they can to maintain that, including, if they think they can get away with it, intervention in Syria. However, the big problem I think there is that this will then lead to a much bigger war. There's already tensions between Israel and Egypt in recent weeks, in post-Mubarak Egypt, and I think that even the British and French and Americans are nervous about a direct intervention in Syria, although I have no doubt they are already intervening indirectly in the country to try to overthrow Assad.
Look, Daniel,
Peter,
jump in.
I'd
Go
like
ahead.
to
Go ahead, Daniel first. Go ahead,
here,
Daniel first. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I simply wanted to add that, it's very clear that the various powers in the West are extremely stretched militarily, economically, financially. I don't think anyone really thinks that these are going to be wars of liberation led by the West waving the flag. The solutions to these problems have to come indigenously. They have to come from the locals and the people. To the extent that the West may be able to add something valuable along those lines that's consistent with what they're trying to achieve, fine. But, living in the United States right now and in many other places in the West, we don't really have the resources to continue to do this. And there isn't the political will on the part of a lot of voters in the West, certainly in the United States, to do it either. So I really don't think it's going to be happening.
Daniel, it's very interesting.
Like
I mean, I don't think anybody in the West, in the United States, and in NATO countries were ever asked if they wanted to go into this war or not. I mean, I seem to remember we got into this war over the weekend at one point. Okay, Eric, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, first of all, regarding Syria, look, the U.S., the Saudis, and the Israelis have been trying to overthrow the Syrian government since the days of the Bush administration. Money was voted for this by Congress, and there are steady reports that some of the armed groups going into Syria are coming out of Lebanon, and they were trained by Western intelligence services, and there's a fight going on. I'm not sure that the U.S. will intervene or the West will intervene in a full-scale war in Syria, because the Syrians, unlike the Libyans, unlike the Iraqis, unlike the Afghans, can shoot back. They have an obsolete but a still fairly tough army. And it will not be a cakewalk, and everybody's worried that what will happen if Syria does collapse and who'll take over the government. It may be like Libya with the Islamists taking over. But look, the West is using humanitarian intervention. That's its new banner for getting involved abroad. Counterterrorism is passé. Humanitarianism is rules, and we'll see other humanitarian interventions when and where it suits the interests of the West or other power blocs.
Lindsay, if I can go to you, when the Soviets left Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, which had been funded by the United States, the CIA, they came back to haunt the United States with the Taliban regime. Do you worry about something like that happening with Libya?
That's already happening in Libya, that there are actually people fighting there who were trained by al-Qaeda, who've been in Afghanistan, and this is, of course, kept very quiet about, but this is something which is already going on. Of course, this is one of the very likely things that would happen, and I had absolutely no time for Gaddafi, and I recognise that many, many Libyans are pleased to see him gone, and I think he is effectively gone. But the truth of the matter is that you cannot just go into countries, overthrow the regime. This has to be a process which the people of those countries themselves undertake, as they have done in Egypt, as they have done in Tunisia, and as they want to do in a number of other countries which they're being prevented from doing, such as in Bahrain. And if you don't do it like that, if you think you can dictate these things in the way that the British Empire used to do, in the way that the Americans now talk about with their imperial overstretch, then you are creating a situation where you will not have real democracy, you will not have real freedom, you will have exactly the kind of chaos and disasters, plus you will have the same people running these countries. You know, the old song from the
Peter,
60s,
could I add here?
you know, the Who song, meet the old boss the same as meet the new boss the same as the old boss. That's what's going on.
Okay.
Peter, I'd like to...
Really quick, 10
comment
seconds.
as well.
Go ahead. Eric, 10 seconds. Jump in.
Libya has never known democracy since the days of the Roman Empire. There's nothing there that looks like democracy, and I don't think we'll be seeing it anytime
All right,
soon.
thank you very much. All right, many thanks to my guests today in London, Denver, and in Toronto, and thanks to the viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.